Good morning, everyone. Today we talk about the Romantic Age. So please get your book, your class book, The Cornerstone, at page 238. And we talk first about the historical background of this age that goes approximately from 1760 to 1837. This is the age of the revolutions. The American one, 1775, the French one, 1789, and the Industrial Revolution. In this moment, in England, George III is reigning, and his policy is extremely conservative. There are also the Napoleonic Wars in the meantime, and British victories are several. The most famous, the Battle of Trafalgar, 1805, and the Battle of Waterloo. Even though they won, these wars left England depressed with unemployment and poverty. I was talking about the Industrial Revolution before. Many workers left the countryside and they moved to the towns. There were two new social classes, entrepreneurs and workers. Workers were exploited, wages were low, and children were also employed and exploited. After George III, there's William IV. He reigned between 1830 and 1837, and during his reign there were three social reforms. The first reform bill, 1832, the Factory Act, 1833, and the Poor Law Amendment Act. Talking about the literary context of this age, this is the period of sensibility. The romantic tendencies were anticipated by the German movement, the Storm and Drang, impeto e tempesta, storm and stress in English. So they rebelled against classicism and they focused on the individual. The two most important key concepts are feelings and passion. So these writers looked for new modes of expression and they gave a great relevance to emotions and to imagination. They concentrated on the inner self and the power of the mind to interpret reality. Dreams and visions became source of inspiration, as nature as well. The central topics were nature and childhood. The poet was considered a prophet or a teacher, and these writers wanted to be understood by everyone. So there were a group of pre-romantic poets, and we're talking about Thomas Gray and William Blake, and afterwards there were two generations of poets. First generation, William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge. Second generation, Lord Byron and John Keats. So, to sum up, we are talking about the Romantic Age, and we have just said that this is the age of sensibility. Sensibility and imagination replaced rationality and harmony, so they were in contrast with the elements of the Enlightenment. So the intellectual, social, and political changes resulted in writers looking for new ways of expressing themselves. So these changes were the changes of literature as well. The romantic tendencies were anticipated by the German literary movement Sturm und Drang, Storm and Stress in English, Impeto e Tempesta in Italiano. These writers, these authors, rebelled against classicism. They focused on the individual, feelings, and nature. The key concepts are emotional matter and imaginative form. This is the age of emotions and imagination. They opposed all the norms which came from the Enlightenment. The inner self was given the power to interpret and reshape reality, resulting in a more subjective interpretation. These writers, these authors, believed in freedom and equality of all human beings. Dreams and visions became source of inspiration. The poets' main interest became the workings of their minds. So these works were extremely strong, and there was also an autobiographical element. The poet became a prophet and the teacher. They wanted to be understood by everybody. The themes of the Romantic authors, as I said before, there was a greater interest in nature. They considered nature and the countryside a source of inspiration, so they preferred the country to town. They thought that towns were hostile places. Nature, on the contrary, offered the poets solitude. And in the nature, in the countryside, they could shape their romantic visions. They also had the need to form a fresh image of the world, so there was a strong interest in childhood. The poet learned to look at the world from a child's perspective. Talking about the pre-Romantic poets, as I said before, two writers in particular represented this age of transition: Thomas Gray and William Blake. The Romantic poets were divided in two generations. The first one says William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge, and their works are considered the manifesto of English Romanticism. Second generation, we are talking about Lord Byron, Shelley, and Keats. These poets remained revolutionary throughout their lives, both in their poetry and in their lifestyles. So although they had different personalities, they were similar in their desire for a better world, a world of justice, freedom, and beauty. So Romanticism is also known as the Romantic era, the Romantic period, was an artistic, literary, and intellectual movement originated in Europe toward the end of the 18th century. The key concepts: emphasis on emotion and individualism, a glorification of all the past and nature, a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, a reaction towards the Age of Enlightenment, and the scientific rationalization of nature. The movement emphasized intense emotion and authentic source of aesthetic experience. In contrast to the rational and classicist ideal models, Romanticism revived medievalism, so the Middle Age, all the elements of Middle Age. So the movement was rooted in the German Sturm and Drang movement and the events and ideologies of French Revolution.